Nobody from my family came to my graduation. Not even my wife nor my kids. They all went to my wife's rich ex-husband's house opening party instead. But when I walked off stage, my phone buzzed with a message from my wife. "We need to talk urgently." Wife's 95 missed calls, so here I am. Marcus Hall, 37 years old, and finally holding a master's degree like it's some kind of holy grail. 5 freaking years of my life down the drain for this piece of paper. And honestly, I'm not even sure if I should be proud or just relieved that the torture is over. You want to know what 5 years of night school while juggling a full-time job and 2 kids looks like? Picture a hamster on a wheel, except the hamster is caffeinated beyond belief, running on 3 hours of sleep, and the wheel is on fire. My alarm went off every morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, because apparently that's what responsible adults do. We wake up before the sun and pretend we're not dying inside. First order of business was always the same routine. Stumble to the kitchen like a zombie. Fire up the coffee machine, my one true love, and start the breakfast assembly line. Liam, my 14-year-old son, needed enough food to fuel a small army because teenage boys are basically human garbage disposals with attitude problems. Grace, my 11-year-old daughter, was pickier than a food critic at a 5-star restaurant and would reject anything that wasn't perfectly arranged on her plate. Meanwhile, I'm standing there in my boxers and yesterday's t-shirt, trying to make everyone happy while mentally rehearsing my presentation for the Henderson account. The lunch packing situation was its own special kind of hell. Liam wanted everything loaded with enough protein to build a small house, while Grace insisted on those fancy organic crackers that cost more per ounce than gold. I'd stand there at the counter assembly lining sandwiches like I was working at Subway. Except I wasn't getting paid and my customers were way more demanding. "Dad, you forgot the mustard." Or "You? This apple has a bruise on it." Became the soundtrack of my mornings. God forbid I should mess up their culinary masterpieces. You'd think I was poisoning them instead of just trying to keep them fed. Then came the real fun part. 10 hours at Clarkson Financial Group, where I spent my days buried deeper in client portfolios than a gravedigger in overtime. Market reports became my Bible and I could recite stock prices like some people quote Shakespeare. My desk was a disaster zone of coffee rings, sticky notes, and the hopes and dreams of middle-class Americans who trusted me with their retirement funds. No pressure there, right? Just the financial futures of dozens of families riding on my ability to read market trends and not screw up their life savings. Some days I felt like a fortune teller with a business degree trying to predict which way the wind would blow in an economy that changed directions more often than a GPS with a broken antenna. My coworkers thought I was crazy for taking night classes on top of everything else. "Marcus, dude, you're already successful." They'd say like success was some kind of fixed state instead of something you had to keep earning every single day. But they didn't get it. They didn't understand that I needed more than just getting by. I wanted to be the guy who could look his kids in the eye and say, "Your old man didn't just settle for mediocre." I wanted to prove that you could start over at 32 and still make something of yourself, even if it meant drinking enough coffee to kill a horse and surviving on determination and spite. The evening commute to campus was where things got really interesting. Picture this. Me still in my work clothes, racing across town to make it to class on time while other people were heading home to their normal lives with their normal schedules. I'd pull into the parking lot at the community college. And there I'd be, the old guy surrounded by 20-somes who still thought energy drinks were a food group and that staying up until 2 a.m. was totally reasonable. 3 hours of lectures stretched ahead of me like a marathon I never trained for. And I'd sit there with my vending machine coffee, which tasted like someone had dissolved cardboard in lukewarm water, trying to absorb information about strategic management and organizational behavior while my brain screamed for sleep. The notes I took during those classes looked like they were written by someone having a seizure. Half the time, I'd wake up the next morning and stare at my notebook, wondering if I'd written in English or just given up and started drawing. Abstract art, synergistic paradigm shifts, and leveraging core competencies. I swear these professors invented new ways to say simple things just to mess with us. But I kept showing up, kept taking notes, kept telling myself that every minute of this academic torture chamber was an investment in my family's future. Claire started out as my biggest cheerleader, bringing me snacks during late-night study sessions and bragging to her friends about her husband bettering himself. But somewhere around year 3, when the novelty wore off and she realized this wasn't just a quick sprint to the finish line, her enthusiasm started evaporating faster than water on hot asphalt. "You're never home anymore," became her favorite complaint, which was hilarious considering I was home every single night, just with my face buried in textbooks instead of planted in front of the TV watching whatever reality show was rotting America's brain that week. The worst part wasn't even the studying or the exhaustion. It was watching my family slowly stop believing in what I was doing. Liam would roll his eyes when I'd miss his basketball games because I had exams. Grace stopped asking me to help with her homework because Daddy's always busy with his own homework. And Claire, she went from supportive wife to something closer to a single mom who happened to share a mortgage with a guy who lived at the kitchen table surrounded by highlighters and empty coffee cups. But I kept telling myself it would all be worth it on graduation day. I had this vision, probably stolen from some cheesy movie where they'd all be there in the audience, beaming with pride as I walked across that stage. Claire would have tears in her eyes. The kids would cheer loud enough to embarrass me. And for once, all those sacrifices would make sense. We'd go to dinner afterward, and they'd finally understand why I'd put us all through 5 years of controlled chaos. I'd proven that Marcus Hall wasn't just another middle-aged guy who peaked in high school. I was someone who could set a goal and crush it, even if it nearly crushed me first. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 5 years learning about business leadership while slowly losing control of my own household. Here I was studying theories about motivating teams and managing resources while my actual team at home was falling apart and my most important resources, time with my family, were being mismanaged worse than a startup with a gambling problem. But hey, at least I could write a killer paper on work-life balance, right? The academic kind of balance, not the actual living it kind that I'd apparently never figured out. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. The way Claire started mentioning Victor more often like he was this shining example of success who had his priorities straight. The way my kids started comparing me to him. Victor took us to that new arcade, or Victor's car is so much cooler than Dad's. But I was too busy cramming for finals and calculating my GPA to notice that while I was building my future, my present was slowly slipping away like sand through my fingers. The truth is I believed. Really truly believed that education was the great equalizer, that hard work and dedication would eventually pay off in ways that mattered. I thought my family would respect the sacrifice, that they'd see a man willing to push himself to his limits for their benefit. I figured they'd understand that sometimes you have to invest in tomorrow, even if it makes today a little harder. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy becoming the man I thought they needed, I was forgetting to be the man they actually wanted around. But graduation day was supposed to fix all that. It was supposed to be the moment when everything clicked into place and they finally got it. Yeah. Well, life had other plans, and those plans involved a pool party that would make my academic achievement look about as important as last week's weather forecast. Let me paint you a picture of Victor Price, because this guy is the kind of character who makes you question everything you thought you knew about fairness in the universe. While I'm over here clipping coupons and calculating whether we can afford name brand cereal this week, Victor's out there living like he's the star of his own reality show called Rich Guys Who Make Everyone Else Feel Inadequate. The man didn't just have money. He had the kind of wealth that comes with its own gravitational pull, sucking in admiration and making normal people like me feel about as significant as a gnat at a barbecue. Claire never talks about her first marriage in detail, but the fragments I've pieced together over the years paint a pretty clear picture. She met Victor when she was 25 and working as an interior designer for some high-end firm downtown. He was 32, already climbing the real estate ladder like it was a jungle gym built specifically for his entertainment. Their wedding photos, which by the way are still prominently displayed in my mother-in-law's living room because apparently that's totally normal, look like something out of a magazine spread. Claire in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Victor looking like he stepped off a yacht advertisement in a venue that screamed, "We have more money than sense and we're not afraid to show it." The marriage lasted 4 years. And here's the kicker. They never had kids together. According to Claire, Victor wasn't ready for the responsibility, too focused on building his empire to worry about building a family. She says it with this wistful tone that makes me wonder if she's talking about the past or dropping hints about her present. But when Victor shows up now, suddenly he's Mr. Fun Uncle who spoils my kids rotten and acts like he invented the concept of being good with children. The guy who was too busy to have kids with his wife is now the hero who takes Liam and Grace to Lakers games and buys them expensive gadgets. I can't justify putting on a credit card that's already groaning under the weight of textbook costs and tuition payments. My in-laws, Richard and Susan, treat Victor like he's the son they never had, which is particularly hilarious since they actually have a son-in-law, me. But apparently I'm the discount version nobody asked for. When we go to family dinners, it's like watching a live-action commercial for how to make Marcus feel like chopped liver in 10 easy steps. Richard, who's about as warm as a penguin convention, lights up like a Christmas tree whenever Victor's name gets mentioned. Did you hear Victor just closed on that waterfront property? Or Victor's thinking about expanding into commercial development. Meanwhile, when I mention landing a new client or hitting my quarterly goals, I get the enthusiasm level usually reserved for discussing lawn maintenance schedules. Susan, bless her heart, tries to be more subtle about her favoritism, but subtle isn't really her strong suit. She'll ask about my work with the same tone people use when inquiring about chronic illnesses. Polite, but clearly hoping to change the subject as quickly as possible. But mention Victor's latest business venture. Suddenly, she's got opinions, insights, and enough questions to fuel a documentary. "Oh, that Victor," she'll say, shaking her head with this fond smile. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead." Yeah, well, I'm thinking 3 steps ahead, too. But apparently, my steps aren't as interesting when they're measured in night school credits instead of real estate acquisitions. The kids, God love them, don't even try to hide their preference for Uncle Victor over dear old Dad. And why would they? I'm the guy who makes them do homework and turn off video games at reasonable hours, while Victor's the cool adult who shows up with no rules and unlimited entertainment budget. When Victor takes them out, it's not to McDonald's and a matinee movie. It's the places with names I can't pronounce and activities that cost more than my monthly car payment. Liam comes home talking about go-kart racing and indoor skydiving like these are normal weekend activities. While I'm over here getting excited about a buy one get one free deal at the grocery store, Grace is even worse because she's reached that age where she's starting to notice the difference between comfortable and wealthy. And guess which category her dear old dad falls into? When Victor bought her that iPad for her birthday, the same iPad I'd been promising her for months, but couldn't quite swing financially. I watched her face light up in a way I hadn't seen since Christmas morning when she was 6. That's when it really hit me. I wasn't competing with another dad. I was competing with Santa Claus. And Santa had a real estate license and a portfolio that could choke a horse. The worst part about Victor isn't that he's rich. Okay, fine. That's definitely part of it, but it's that he's actually a decent guy. I've tried to find reasons to hate him, believe me. But the man is frustratingly likable when he's not accidentally making me feel like a financial failure. He's polite to me, respectful to Claire, and genuinely good with the kids. If he were a complete jerk, this would be so much easier. I could channel my resentment into righteous anger and feel justified in my jealousy. Instead, I'm stuck resenting a guy who's basically the successful version of what I'm trying to become, which makes me feel petty and small and about as mature as a teenager whose crush is dating the quarterback. Claire swears the divorce was mutual, that they just grew apart. But I sometimes wonder if what really happened was that she got tired of being married to someone whose idea of a big night out was dinner at a restaurant that didn't require reservations 2 weeks in advance. She settled for me, the stable guy, the responsible choice, the human equivalent of a sensible sedan. When what she really wanted was a sports car. I worked my ass off to give her and the kids a good life. But good and exciting are apparently 2 different things, and Victor's got the market cornered on exciting. So, when I sit in those night classes scribbling notes about market analysis and strategic planning, while my professor drones on about synergistic solutions to complex business challenges, I'm not just studying for a degree. I'm studying to become the kind of man who doesn't have to worry about being outshined by his wife's ex-husband at every family gathering. I'm working toward a future where my accomplishments matter as much as Victor's latest property acquisition, where my kids brag about their dad instead of just tolerating him between visits from the fun guy with the unlimited entertainment budget. The professors love to talk about return on investment and long-term strategic planning. But they never mention the part where your investment costs you 5 years of bedtime stories, missed baseball games, and watching your family slowly forget that you exist for anything beyond bill paying and rule enforcing. They don't tell you that while you're busy investing in your future, your present starts looking like a house where you're the tenant instead of the owner, always working to earn your place at a table that used to be automatically yours. But I kept telling myself it would all be worth it on graduation day. That moment when they called my name and I walked across that stage would validate every missed dinner, every late-night study session. Every time I chose textbooks over family time, my wife and kids would finally see that all those sacrifices were building towards something meaningful, something that would make their lives better in the long run. They'd understand that Dad wasn't just absent. He was working toward a future where being absent wouldn't be necessary anymore. I had this whole fantasy worked out in my head. Probably influenced by too many movies where the underdog gets his moment of triumph and everyone realizes they should have believed in him all along. Claire would have tears of pride in her eyes. Liam would actually admit that his old man was pretty cool. And Grace would hug me so tight I'd know that all those nights I missed tucking her and were forgiven. We'd go to dinner afterward, somewhere nice, somewhere I could finally afford without checking the bank balance first, and they'd hang on every word as I told them about my plans for the future, our future, the one I'd been building brick by brick through 5 years of academic torture. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy becoming the man I thought they needed, I was forgetting to be the man they actually wanted around. And Victor never had to choose between being present and being successful. He was born with enough money to be both. 6 months before graduation, I did something that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I started planning like this day was actually going to matter. You know that feeling when you're finally close enough to the finish line that you can actually see it instead of just imagining it exists somewhere in the mythical distance. That was me sitting at my laptop on a Tuesday night in February, officially reserving 3 seats for the ceremony like I was booking front row tickets to see my own life finally make sense. The university's reservation system was about as user-friendly as a tax audit. But I navigated through it with the determination of a man who'd already survived 5 years of academic bureaucracy. 3 seats, 1 for Claire, 1 for Liam, 1 for Grace. Not exactly filling up a whole section, but hey, quality over quantity, right? I even splurged for the premium seating option, which probably just meant the chairs wouldn't collapse during the ceremony, but it felt like investing in my family's comfort for the most important day of my adult life. $25 extra for seats that weren't in the nosebleeds. Practically a fortune by my standards, but this wasn't the time to pinch pennies. Then came the restaurant reservation, which turned into its own special kind of financial gymnastics. Bella Orto wasn't just any restaurant. It was the restaurant. The kind of place where people go to celebrate life's big moments instead of just grabbing dinner because everyone's hungry. I'd been driving past this place for 3 years, watching well-dressed couples walk in while I headed home to leftover pizza and homework, telling myself that someday I'd earn the right to eat somewhere that required reservations and didn't hand out crayons with the menus. Making that reservation felt like placing a bet on my own future. The hostess on the phone had that professionally cheerful voice that probably cost extra, asking if this was for a special occasion. When I said it was for my graduation dinner, she congratulated me like we were old friends. And for a minute, I felt like someone who deserved congratulations instead of just someone who'd stubbornly refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. Party of 4 for Saturday, May 18th at 7 p.m., she confirmed, and I repeated it back like I was accepting a mission from the president. The deposit was $50, which might not sound like much to normal people, but normal people aren't funding master's degrees while supporting a family on a financial advisor's salary in an economy that treats middle-class dreams like they're cute but impractical hobbies. $50 was groceries for 3 days or gas money or the difference between name brand and generic everything for a month. But I transferred the money anyway because some things are worth the financial anxiety. And proving to my family that I could afford to celebrate my own achievements felt pretty damn important. Shopping for a graduation outfit turned into an adventure in self-delusion and retail therapy. I spent 2 hours at Men's Warehouse trying on suits like I was auditioning for a role in Successful Adults Who Have Their Lives Together. The salesman, who was probably 19 and definitely getting commission on whatever I bought, kept pushing me toward the more expensive options. "This navy blue really brings out your eyes," he said, like my eyes were the selling point instead of my desperate need to look like someone who deserved a graduate degree. I settled on a dark gray suit that made me feel like a character from a movie about Wall Street, except I worked in a strip mall office, and my biggest financial coup was talking Mrs. Henderson out of putting her entire retirement in cryptocurrency. The suit cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 2 years combined. But when I looked in the dressing room mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. A guy who looked like he might actually know what he was doing. The pants needed hemming. The jacket needed minor alterations. And the whole thing needed to be ready by graduation day, which meant I was now on the hook with a tailor who spoke in measurements and promises. The shoes were their own separate financial crisis. Apparently, you can't just wear any old shoes with a suit. They need to be dress shoes that complement the ensemble. According to the teenager who was now my fashion consultant, I found a pair of black Oxfords that looked expensive enough to justify the suit, but not so expensive that I'd need to take out a personal loan. They were stiff as cardboard and squeaked when I walked, but the salesman assured me they'd break in beautifully with wear, which was retailer speak for. Your feet will hate you for the first month, but you'll look professional while suffering. I scheduled a haircut for graduation morning at Tony's barber shop, where I'd been getting my hair cut since moving to this neighborhood 8 years ago. Tony's the kind of old-school barber who still uses a straight razor and tells stories that probably aren't true but are entertaining enough that you don't care. "Big day, huh, Marcus?" he said when I made the appointment because apparently everyone in a 5 meters radius knew about my academic marathon. "Going to clean you up real nice for the ceremony." I like that Tony understood the importance of looking sharp for life's milestone moments. Even if his definition of sharp hadn't evolved much since 1987, but the real planning, the emotional planning was happening in my head during those quiet moments between chaos. I'd be sitting in traffic on my way to class and I'd start imagining the ceremony like it was a movie I was directing in my mind. The music would swell as they called my name. Marcus Hall, Master of Business Administration, summa cum laude, because hell yes, I was graduating with honors after 5 years of academic torture. Claire would be in the third row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, finally understanding why I'd missed so many dinners and weekend trips. Liam would actually look up from his phone, maybe even smile, realizing that his old man was tougher than he thought. And Grace would bounce in her seat with excitement, proud to tell her friends that her daddy was the guy in the fancy hat walking across the stage. The dinner afterward would be perfect in that way that only happens in movies and the dreams of exhausted graduate students. We'd sit at a table with actual cloth napkins instead of the paper towels we used at home. And I'd order something more expensive than the kids' meals for once. The conversation would flow like wine, except better because I'd actually be able to afford wine that didn't come in a box. Claire would reach across the table and squeeze my hand, telling me how proud she was, how worth it the whole journey had been. The kids would ask questions about my classes, actually interested in my answers instead of just waiting for their turn to talk about video games or whatever drama was happening at school. I even practiced my acceptance speech in the shower because apparently that's what happens to your brain after 5 years of academic pressure. You start giving imaginary speeches to an audience of shampoo bottles and shower curtain. This degree represents more than just academic achievement. I'd tell the mirror while shaving, gesturing with my razor like it was a pointer. It represents the power of perseverance, the importance of never giving up on your dreams, and the value of hard work in an instant gratification society. Yeah, I was definitely losing it, but losing it with style and a clear sense of purpose. The funny thing about planning a perfect day is that it requires you to ignore all the evidence suggesting your day might not go according to plan. Like the way Claire had been increasingly distracted lately, always checking her phone and mentioning Victor's latest achievements with the kind of enthusiasm she used to reserve for my progress reports. Or how Liam had started asking if he had to go to the graduation ceremony, like attending his father's academic triumph was some kind of cruel and unusual punishment. Grace was still on board, mostly because she liked any excuse to dress up and get attention. But even she'd started asking if the ceremony would be boring and how long it would take. But I pushed those doubts aside because this was my moment. Damn it. And I'd earned the right to have my family there cheering me on. 5 years of sacrifice. 5 years of choosing textbooks over television and study groups over family game nights. 5 years of becoming a stranger in my own house so I could become someone my family would be proud to call husband and father. This graduation wasn't just about me getting a degree. It was about proving that all those nights I chose responsibility over relaxation had been building towards something meaningful. I bought frames for the diploma before I'd even received it. Because optimism mixed with exhaustion makes you do weird things like plan display options for achievements you haven't technically achieved yet. I researched photographers for family photos, found a guy who specialized in graduation ceremonies and charged reasonable rates for capturing life's precious moments. I even looked into getting a nice watch to commemorate the occasion, something I could wear to work and remember this accomplishment every time I checked the time during client meetings. The truth is, I needed this day to be perfect because it felt like my last chance to prove that the past 5 years hadn't been a colossal mistake disguised as self-improvement. I needed my family to see me as someone worth celebrating, someone whose achievements mattered enough to warrant their undivided attention for one afternoon. I needed to feel like the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in everyone else's more interesting lives. 3 weeks before my graduation, 3 weeks before the culmination of 5 years of academic hell and personal sacrifice, Claire dropped a conversational bomb that made my master's thesis defense look like a casual chat about the weather. We were sitting at the dinner table, engaging in our usual evening routine of me asking about everyone's day while secretly calculating how many pages of reading I had left before bed when she casually mentioned Victor's latest life development. Like she was commenting on the meatloaf. "Victor's having a house opening party the same day as your ceremony," she said, cutting her chicken with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been rehearsing this conversation in her head. "His new place is insane. You should see the pool." The way she said it with this breathy excitement that I hadn't heard from her in months made my stomach drop faster than my GPA during organic chemistry. This wasn't just idle conversation. This was the setup to a punchline I really didn't want to hear. I actually laughed at first because what else do you do when your wife casually mentions that your biggest competition is throwing a party on the most important day of your adult life? It was such a ridiculous coincidence that it had to be a joke, right? Like the universe had run out of other ways to test my patience and decided to get creative with its timing. "Well, that's unfortunate timing for Victor," I said, spearing a piece of broccoli like it had personally offended me. "Guess I'll have to celebrate his new mansion some other weekend." But Claire kept going, and with each word, I realized this wasn't a casual observation. It was market research for a decision she was already considering. "His parents are flying in from Seattle," she continued. Her voice carrying that same tone she used when describing vacation destinations we couldn't afford. "And get this, the house has an infinity pool that overlooks the valley, a wine cellar, and apparently the kitchen cost more than most people's cars. The kids are so excited to see it. Wait, hold up, rewind. The kids already know about this party? I asked, setting down my fork with the kind of deliberate control that comes right before you lose all control. When exactly did this come up in conversation? Because last I checked, we weren't in the habit of discussing Victor's social calendar at the family dinner table, and my children definitely weren't supposed to be more informed about my wife's ex-husband's real estate ventures than I was. Oh, he mentioned it when he picked them up last weekend. Claire said like this was totally normal and not at all the kind of information that should have been shared with the actual head of household. He wanted to make sure they knew about it in case we were free. Free on my graduation day. The day I'd been planning for 6 months. The day we'd all marked on our calendars. The day that was supposed to be about celebrating my achievement instead of drooling over Victor's latest acquisition. That's when Grace, my sweet 11-year-old daughter who used to think I hung the moon, decided to twist the knife a little deeper. Dad, Victor's pool has a water slide and a hot tub. And he said, we could bring friends if we want. It's going to be so cool. The enthusiasm in her voice was like listening to a commercial for everything I couldn't provide. Excitement, luxury, the kind of fun that doesn't require advanced planning or budget calculations. Liam, not to be outdone in the let's make dad feel inadequate department, chimed in with his own contribution to my growing existential crisis. And he's hiring a DJ and getting one of those taco trucks that makes everything fresh. Plus, his parents are supposedly really funny, not like grandma and grandpa who just complain about everything. Thanks, son. Nothing like a 14-year-old's brutal honesty to really drive home the point that your extended family doesn't measure up to your wife's ex-husband's extended family. I sat there for a moment trying to process what was happening while my family continued discussing Victor's party like it was the social event of the century and my graduation was just some minor scheduling conflict. Wait, I said probably louder than necessary. You're not actually thinking of going to this thing, are you? Because surely my wife of 8 years understood that attending her ex-husband's housewarming party instead of her current husband's graduation ceremony would be the kind of relationship-ending move that therapists write case studies about. Claire's face did this thing where she tried to look innocent while simultaneously looking guilty, which is apparently a facial expression they teach in advanced wife studies. It's not just a party, Marcus, she said like I was the one being unreasonable here. It's a networking event. There'll be people there who could really help with my interior design business. And you know how hard it's been to get clients lately. Yes, the business card. Of course, this was about Claire's career because heaven forbid we should prioritize my career milestone over her networking opportunities. The interior design business that consisted mostly of helping her friends rearrange their living rooms and occasionally getting paid for it. The business that was definitely going to take off any day now, just as soon as she met the right people at the right party thrown by the right ex-husband with the right connections. Plus, she continued, really warming up to her argument now. The kids really want to go, and they never get opportunities like this. I mean, when are they going to see a house like that again? Never mind that they'd been looking forward to my graduation for months, or that we'd already made reservations at Bella Orta, or that this was supposed to be our family's celebration of something I'd worked 5 years to achieve. Apparently, a house with an infinity pool trumped their father's academic achievement. I reminded her with what I thought was admirable restraint that I'd been planning this day for literally years. Claire, I made those restaurant reservations 6 months ago. I bought a suit. I scheduled time off work. This is my graduation day we're talking about, not some random Saturday afternoon. I could hear my voice getting tighter with each word, like someone was slowly turning a screw in my chest. That's when she hit me with the line that would echo in my head for weeks afterward. Marcus, it's just a graduation. You already had one for your bachelor's degree. Just a graduation. 5 years of night school. 5 years of missing bedtime stories and weekend trips. 5 years of choosing textbooks over family time, and she called it just a graduation. Like getting a master's degree while working full-time and raising 2 kids was equivalent to picking up dry cleaning or getting an oil change. Besides, she added, apparently not satisfied with the level of devastation she'd already achieved. Graduations are really more for the person graduating anyway. You'll be busy with the ceremony and the photos. You probably won't even notice if we're there or not, right? Because nothing says supportive family like skipping out on life's major milestones because they might be boring or inconvenient. The kids, sensing an opportunity to pile on, started listing all the reasons why Victor's party sounded infinitely more appealing than sitting through what Grace called boring speeches by people we don't know. Liam added that graduation ceremonies were just a bunch of old people walking around in weird hats, which was particularly hurtful since I was about to be one of those old people in weird hats. Grace mentioned that Victor had promised to let them drive his boat if they came to the party, which was apparently more exciting than watching their father receive academic honors. I tried to explain that this wasn't just about me. It was about what we prioritized as a family, about showing up for each other during important moments, about teaching our children that education and personal achievement matter. But my carefully reasoned arguments couldn't compete with the promise of water slides and taco trucks and boat rides with the fun adult who never made anyone do homework or chores. Look, Claire said, adopting that reasonable tone that women use when they're about to be completely unreasonable. Maybe we can stop by the ceremony for a little bit and then head over to Victor's afterward. Best of both worlds, right? Because nothing says this is important to me like treating my graduation ceremony as a brief pit stop on the way to a more exciting destination. I went to bed that night with Claire's words stuck in my head like a splinter. It's just a graduation. Just a graduation. The thing I'd been working toward for 5 years, the goal that had gotten me through countless late nights and early mornings. The achievement that was supposed to prove I was more than just another middle-aged guy stuck in middle management. According to my wife, it was just a graduation. Meanwhile, Victor's housewarming party was a networking opportunity and a once-in-a-lifetime experience for the kids. The worst part wasn't even the disappointment. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, I'd become the obligation in my own family. The responsible one, the reliable one, the one who paid the bills and enforced the rules and worked late into the night to provide for everyone else's dreams while my own dreams were relegated to just status. I was the supporting character in my own life story, and Victor was the guest star who showed up with better props and a bigger budget. That night, staring at the ceiling while Claire slept peacefully beside me, I started to understand that this wasn't really about a scheduling conflict between a graduation ceremony and a house party. This was about priorities, about respect, about whether my family saw me as someone worth celebrating or just someone who happened to live in their house and pay their bills. And based on their reaction to Victor's party invitation, I was starting to get my answer. And it wasn't the answer I'd been hoping for after 5 years of sacrifice. The night before my graduation, I came home from picking up my cap and gown, expecting to find my family buzzing with excitement about tomorrow's ceremony. You know, maybe Claire laying out her dress, the kids asking questions about the graduation process, everyone acting like we were preparing for something that mattered. Instead, I walked into our kitchen to find my wife packing beach towels and sunscreen like she was prepping for a day at Disneyland rather than her husband's academic triumph. For the pool tomorrow, she said without even looking up from the canvas bag, she was stuffing with enough supplies to survive a week on a tropical island. Her tone was casual, like she was explaining why she needed to grab milk from the store, not why she was preparing to ditch my graduation ceremony for Victor's house party. The sight of those towels, bright yellow and blue stripes that we bought for our last family vacation, sitting there like evidence of betrayal, made my chest feel tight. I stood in the doorway holding my graduation regalia, this black polyester symbol of 5 years of sacrifice, and watched my wife pack for someone else's celebration. The cap and gown were in a clear plastic bag with "Congratulations Graduate" printed across the front and cheerful letters that now felt like they were mocking me. Here I was finally holding the costume for my moment of triumph while my support system was literally packing up to leave. "Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the fact that my blood pressure was probably approaching stroke levels. "We need to talk about tomorrow." She looked up from the bag with this expression that was part innocence, part defiance, like a teenager who'd been caught sneaking out, but wasn't sorry about it. "What about tomorrow?" she asked, which was either the most toned response in marriage history or a deliberate attempt to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. The argument that followed wasn't really an argument. It was more like a one-sided conversation where I tried to explain why attending my graduation mattered, while Claire offered increasingly creative reasons why Victor's party was more important. "The kids have been looking forward to this pool party for weeks," she said, which was hilarious since they'd only known about it for 3 weeks and had presumably been looking forward to my graduation for much longer. "And you know how Grace gets around water? She's been practicing her diving all month." "Wait, what? Grace has been practicing diving?" I asked, feeling like I'd missed several chapters of my own family story. When had my 11-year-old daughter become an aspiring Olympic diver, and why was this the first I was hearing about it? At the community center, Claire explained, like this was common knowledge that I should have somehow absorbed through osmosis while buried in my business strategy textbooks. That's when Liam wandered into the kitchen, took one look at the beach bag, and said, "Sweet. We're still going to Victor's party tomorrow, right?" The enthusiasm in his voice was like a knife to the gut. When was the last time my son had shown that level of excitement about anything involving me? "I told Jake and Connor I'd send them pictures of the house," he continued, pulling out his phone to presumably text his friends about his upcoming social media opportunities at my expense. "Actually," I said, trying to channel whatever parental authority I had left, "we're going to my graduation ceremony tomorrow. You know, The thing we've been planning for 6 months. The reason I bought that suit hanging in the closet and made reservations at Bella Ororta. Both kids looked at me like I just announced we were spending the weekend reorganizing the garage. A mixture of disappointment and resignation that parents know all too well. Grace chose that moment to make her entrance, bouncing into the kitchen with her swimsuit in one hand and a bottle of sunscreen in the other. "Mom, do you think Victor's pool is heated?" Because Sarah's mom said infinity pools are sometimes cold and I don't want to freeze while I'm practicing my cannonballs. The fact that my daughter was consulting other parents about pool temperature for a party she was attending instead of my graduation ceremony felt like the universe's way of telling me I'd lost control of my own life. "Grace, sweetheart," I said, crouching down to her level and trying to inject some authority into my voice. "We're not going to Victor's party tomorrow. We're going to Daddy's graduation. Remember the big day we've been talking about?" She looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for people who don't understand that Santa Claus isn't real. "But Dad, we already told Victor we'd be there. It would be rude not to go." There it was, my 11-year-old daughter lecturing me about rudeness while my family prioritized someone else's feelings over mine. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a diploma. "And besides," she added, really driving the point home, "graduations are boring. All those people in weird hats walking around while some old guy talks for forever." Claire jumped back into the conversation before I could address my daughter's assessment of academic ceremonies. "Marcus, you're being unreasonable. This is a huge opportunity for the kids to see how successful people live. It's educational." Educational. Apparently, touring Victor's mansion was a valuable learning experience while watching their father receive a master's degree was just tedious entertainment. "Educational," I repeated, feeling my voice rise despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You want to know what's educational? Showing your children that hard work and perseverance pay off. Demonstrating that when someone in your family achieves something important, you show up to support them. Teaching them that education matters more than pool parties and networking opportunities." That's when Claire really let me have it. "Don't lecture me about family values. Marcus, you've been absent for 5 years, buried in books and classes, missing dinners and family game nights. Now you want us to sit through hours of boring speeches just so you can feel validated." The words hit me like a physical blow, mostly because there was just enough truth in them to make the lie feel believable. Yes, I'd been absent. Yes, I'd missed dinners and game nights and bedtime stories, but I'd been absent for them, building something that would benefit our entire family, sacrificing my present for their future. The fact that they couldn't see the difference between selfish absence and purposeful sacrifice made me question whether they really knew me at all. "Fine," I said, "because sometimes surrender feels easier than fighting a battle you're clearly not going to win. Go to Victor's party. Have fun swimming in his pool and eating his catered food and networking with his successful friends, but don't pretend you're doing it for the kid's education or your career. On the fact that you're choosing him over me." The silence that followed was the kind of heavy quiet that settles over a house when everyone realizes they've said things they can't take back. Liam looked uncomfortable. Grace seemed confused. And Claire had that expression she gets when she knows she's wrong, but is too proud to admit it. I stood there holding my graduation cap and gown, feeling like an actor who'd been handed the wrong script for a play he didn't want to be in. By midnight, we weren't speaking. The kids had gone to bed without their usual good nights, unsure how to navigate the tension that had settled over our house like a toxic fog. Claire was in the bathroom doing her nighttime routine with more aggressive teeth brushing than necessary while I sat on the edge of our bed staring at my suit hanging on the closet door. The suit looked lonely hanging there, like a costume for a performance that had been cancelled due to lack of audience interest. I'd spent more on that outfit than I'd spent on clothes in 2 years. And tomorrow, I'd wear it to sit alone at my own graduation ceremony while my family splashed around in another man's pool. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd worked so hard to become someone worthy of respect, that I'd somehow become someone who didn't deserve basic consideration. I tried to picture tomorrow's ceremony without them there. Walking across that stage to polite applause from strangers, posing for photos with classmates whose families had actually shown up sitting alone at Bella or to eating a celebration dinner for one. The image was so pathetic it made my chest hurt. 5 years of sacrifice and this was my reward. A degree I'd receive in solitude and a family who'd rather be anywhere else. When Claire finally came to bed, she lay down with her back to me, and we both pretended to sleep while thinking about all the things we should have said differently. In the morning, I'd wake up to face the biggest day of my academic career alone, while the people I'd done it all for would be diving into someone else's pool, eating someone else's food, and pretending they didn't have a husband and father who'd just achieved something worth celebrating. The worst part wasn't even the disappointment. It was the realization that tomorrow would prove once and for all where I ranked in my own family's priorities. And based on tonight's argument, I was about to graduate summa cum laude in advanced irrelevance. The morning of my graduation dawned like any other Saturday, which felt like a cosmic joke considering it was supposed to be the most important day of my adult life. No fanfare, no special breakfast, no excited family members rushing around getting ready for a celebration 5 years in the making. Just silence. The kind of heavy oppressive silence that fills a house when everyone's avoiding eye contact and pretending yesterday's argument never happened. I woke up alone in my own bed. Claire having claimed the guest room like it was Switzerland in our domestic war. And for a moment, I actually forgot what day it was. Then I saw my graduation gown hanging on the closet door like a black polyester reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The kitchen felt like a crime scene where hope had been murdered. No coffee brewing, no breakfast preparations, no kids arguing over cereal choices. Just me and a note propped against the coffee maker like a Dear John letter written in Claire's careful handwriting. Taking Liam and Grace to Victor's early. Hope it goes well. We'll try to make it to the ceremony. We'll try. 5 years of sacrifice. And my wife was going to try to make it to my graduation ceremony like it was an optional social event she might squeeze into her busy schedule of pool parties and ex-husband networking opportunities. I stood there holding that note, reading it 3 times like the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But nope, my family had officially chosen water slides over my walk across the stage. The really pathetic part was that somewhere in my delusional heart, I'd still been hoping they'd change their minds overnight. I'd imagine walking downstairs to find them dressed and ready, maybe even a little sheepish about yesterday's argument, but ultimately there to support me because that's what families do. Instead, I found abandonment with a side of false hope. I made coffee for one person, which felt like the saddest domestic task imaginable. The coffee maker, designed for family-sized pots, seemed to mock me, as it gurgled out enough caffeine for a single disappointed graduate. I'd gotten so used to making breakfast for 4 that cooking for just myself felt like admitting defeat. 2 pieces of toast, scrambled eggs for 1, orange juice in a glass that echoed when I set it down on our suddenly too big dining table. This was supposed to be a celebration breakfast, but it tasted more like a last meal. Getting dressed in my graduation outfit. The expensive suit I'd bought specifically for this day. The shoes that had cost me a week's worth of groceries. The tie I'd practiced knotting a dozen times. Felt like putting on a costume for a plane nobody wanted to see. I looked in the mirror and saw a guy who'd achieved something significant while somehow managing to lose everything that mattered. The dark gray suit that had made me feel confident in the store now just made me look like I was dressed for a funeral. My funeral, apparently, since my family had already moved on without me. The drive to campus was a special kind of torture because every red light gave me more time to think about how spectacularly wrong this day was going. I'd imagined driving to my graduation with Claire in the passenger seat, the kids in the back, everyone excited and proud and ready to celebrate together. Instead, I was alone in my 10-year-old Honda, listening to morning radio DJs who sounded way too cheerful for a day that felt like emotional apocalypse. Even the traffic seemed to be conspiring against me. Every other car seemed to be filled with families heading somewhere together, kids pressed against windows, parents talking and laughing, the kind of togetherness I'd apparently taken for granted until it was gone. Parking at the university was its own humiliation because the lot was packed with families unloading flowers, cameras, and enough enthusiasm to power a small city, grandparents in their Sunday best, siblings taking selfies, parents wearing buttons with photos of their graduates. It was like walking into a Norman Rockwell painting where I was the only person who didn't belong. I watched a family of 6 pile out of a minivan. All of them wearing matching t-shirts that said, "Proud of our graduate." And I had to look away before the jealousy killed me. The auditorium was exactly what I'd expected, packed to capacity with proud families who'd actually shown up to support their graduates. Every seat seemed occupied by someone's cheering section. People who'd cleared their calendars and dressed up and brought flowers because someone they loved was walking across that stage. Today, I found my spot in the graduate lineup, sandwiched between Jennifer Martinez, whose entire extended family had apparently flown in from Puerto Rico, and David Chun, whose parents were already crying with pride, and the ceremony hadn't even started yet. Everyone around me was adjusting their caps, checking their phones for last-minute good luck messages from family members, talking about dinner plans and photo sessions, and all the celebration activities I'd planned but would now be doing solo. "Are your folks here yet?" Jennifer asked, craning her neck to scan the audience like she was genuinely interested in my family's attendance situation. I mumbled something noncommittal about them running late because admitting that my wife had chosen her ex-husband's pool party over my graduation felt like the kind of humiliation that would follow me for the rest of my academic career. David's mom caught my eye from the audience and waved enthusiastically, apparently including me in her maternal pride by association, which somehow made everything worse. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches about achievement and perseverance and the importance of lifelong learning. All the inspirational garbage that sounds meaningful when you have people in the audience who care about your success. The dean talked about how proud the families must be. How this day represented not just individual achievement, but community support and shared sacrifice. I sat there thinking about how my community was currently cannonballing into Victor's infinity pool while I collected the degree they'd apparently forgotten to care about. When they started calling names for master's degree recipients, my heart rate picked up like I was approaching the electric chair instead of academic recognition. Marcus Hall, Master of Business Administration, summa cum laude. The words echoed through the auditorium, and I stood up, walked across that stage, and shook hands with the dean like I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. But instead of the triumphant moment I'd imagined, it felt hollow, like going through the motions of someone else's dream. The applause was polite and generic, the kind you get from strangers who clap. Because clapping is what you do at graduations, not because they're invested in your success. I held my diploma and smiled for the photographer. But it felt like the most expensive participation trophy ever awarded. All that work, all that sacrifice, all those nights I'd chosen textbooks over family time. And for what? To walk across a stage alone while my wife and kids splashed around at a party thrown by the man who represented everything I wasn't successful enough to be. The irony was crushing. I'd earned the highest honors in my program while simultaneously failing the most important test of my life. Keeping my family engaged in my dreams long enough to see them come true. After the ceremony, the lawn outside the auditorium turned into a massive celebration zone where every graduate except me seemed to be surrounded by proud relatives taking photos and planning dinner reservations. Families posed with their graduates. Grandparents cried happy tears. Siblings complained about having to take just one more picture. I stood off to the side like a party crasher at my own celebration, watching other people live the day I'd been planning for 5 years. My phone stayed stubbornly silent. No congratulatory texts. No wish we could be there messages. No acknowledgement that today was any different from any other Saturday in the Hall family calendar. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness. It was the growing realization that this day had revealed something fundamental about my relationship with my family that I'd been too busy or too naive to see before. While I'd been grinding through graduate school, telling myself I was building a better future for all of us, they'd been building a life that apparently didn't include room for my achievements. I'd been so focused on becoming someone worthy of their pride that I'd missed the fact that they'd already decided I wasn't worth their time. After the ceremony ended and the last of the happy families had cleared out with their flowers and photo albums and promises of celebratory dinners, I found myself standing alone on the university lawn like the world's most overdressed scarecrow. The campus that had been buzzing with excitement 20 minutes earlier now looked like the aftermath of a party I hadn't been invited to. Scattered programs blowing in the wind, a few abandoned graduation caps, and the kind of emptiness that settles over places where joy used to be. I sat on a bench under an oak tree, still wearing my cap and gown like some kind of academic ghost, and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life's biggest day. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. And for one pathetic moment, my heart jumped with hope. Maybe it was Claire calling to congratulate me, or the kids texting to say they were proud of their old man, or even just someone acknowledging that I'd accomplished something worth acknowledging. I pulled out my phone expecting validation and instead found something that made my blood turn to ice water. 95 missed calls from Claire. 95. Not 1 or 2 calls you might miss during a ceremony, but 95 calls. The kind of number that means someone's either having a mental breakdown or there's an emergency so serious that social etiquette goes out the window. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the call log, watching the timestamp show that she'd been trying to reach me for the past hour while I was sitting through speeches about achievement and perseverance. The calls had started around the time they would have arrived at Victor's party and escalated to the point where she was calling every few minutes, which meant something had gone catastrophically wrong at the pool party that was supposed to be more important than my graduation ceremony. The irony wasn't lost on me that the event my family had chosen over my academic triumph was now the source of what appeared to be a full-scale emergency. I called her back with the kind of dread usually reserved for phone calls from hospitals or the IRS. And she answered before the first ring even finished, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. "Marcus, thank God," she said, and her voice had that high-tight quality that happens when someone's been crying and trying not to hyperventilate at the same time. "I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Where have you been?" "Where have I been?" "Oh, just at my graduate school ceremony that you skipped to attend a pool party." "But sure, let's pretend I'm the one who's been unavailable." "I was at my graduation," I said, probably with more edge than was appropriate for an emergency situation, but I was still processing the fact that my biggest academic achievement had just been interrupted by a crisis at Victor's house. My phone was on silent during the ceremony. What's wrong? Because clearly something was very wrong. And despite my anger about this morning's abandonment, these were still my kids we were talking about. And my kids trumped everything else, including my wounded pride. Victor's pool deck collapsed, she said in a rush like she'd been rehearsing this explanation and needed to get it out before she lost her nerve. People fell into the water. There was this horrible cracking sound and then part of the deck just gave way. Liam's hurt, his leg. We're at Westbrook Hospital right now. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking all the air out of my lungs and making my graduation gown suddenly feel like it was made of lead instead of polyester. Liam, my 14-year-old son, who'd been so excited about Victor's water slide and arcade games that he'd been willing to skip his father's graduation for them. The kid who thought I was boring and uncool and not nearly as fun as his mother's ex-husband with the unlimited entertainment budget. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was that he was hurt and in a hospital and I was sitting on a university bench 20 minutes away wearing academic regalia like some kind of educational superhero who'd failed to protect his own family. How bad is it? I asked, already standing up and heading toward my car, my cap falling off and rolling across the grass like a black frisbee. I didn't have time to chase. Is he okay? Is he conscious? What did the doctors say? My mind was racing through worst-case scenarios. Broken bones, head injuries, spinal damage. All the things that could happen when pool decks collapse and teenagers fall into water surrounded by concrete and construction debris. He's conscious, Claire said, and I could hear the relief in her voice, even through her panic. His leg is definitely broken. Maybe his ankle, too. They're doing x-rays now. But Marcus, it was so scary. One minute everyone was having a good time and the next minute there was screaming and people in the water and Liam couldn't get up. Her voice cracked on the last part and despite everything that had happened between us, my heart broke a little for how terrified she must have been. I was already in my car yanking off my graduation gown and throwing it in the passenger seat like it was contaminated with bad luck. I'm on my way, I said, starting the engine and backing out of the parking space with the kind of reckless urgency that comes when your child is in the hospital and nothing else in the universe matters. Which hospital? Westbrook on 5th Street. Because there were apparently multiple Westbrook hospitals in our city because this day needed to be more complicated than it already was. Yes, the emergency room, she confirmed. Marcus, I'm so sorry about your graduation. I know how important it was to you and now. But I cut her off because this wasn't the time for apologies or relationship discussions or acknowledging that my family had chosen poorly when they decided to skip my ceremony for Victor's party. This was about getting to my son and making sure he was okay and dealing with whatever medical crisis was waiting for me at the hospital. Don't worry about that right now, I said, which was probably the most mature thing I'd said all week. Just stay with Liam and tell him I'm coming. How's Grace handling all this? Because my 11-year-old daughter had probably never seen anything more traumatic than a scraped knee. And watching her brother get hurt in an accident was likely more excitement than her young psyche was equipped to handle. She's okay, just scared, Claire said. Victor's parents are with her, trying to keep her distracted. Victor's here, too. He feels terrible about the deck. Apparently, it was some kind of construction defect, and the contractors are saying it wasn't built to code. Victor feels terrible. Of course, he does. The guy who'd been the star of my family's weekend plans was now dealing with a pool deck that had tried to kill my son, which was probably not the kind of networking event Claire had been hoping for when she'd chosen his party over my graduation ceremony. I drove through downtown like I was racing to defuse a bomb, running yellow lights and taking corners fast enough to make my tires squeal in protest. Every red light felt like a personal insult from the universe. Every slow driver in front of me became an obstacle between me and my injured son. My graduation gown slid around the passenger seat like a reminder of how quickly life's priorities can shift. One minute you're celebrating academic achievement, the next minute you're racing to the hospital because the pool party that trumped your ceremony has turned into a medical emergency. The really messed up part was that even in the middle of my panic about Liam, part of my brain was calculating the irony of the situation. My family had chosen Victor's party over my graduation because it promised to be more fun, more exciting, more worthy of their time than sitting through a boring ceremony. And now that same party had put my son in the hospital while I was sitting alone on a university lawn in academic regalia, completely uninformed about the crisis because I'd been busy achieving something nobody cared enough to witness. By the time I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my graduation day had officially become the most emotionally confusing day of my adult life. I'd achieved my biggest professional goal while feeling completely abandoned by my family. And now that same family needed me to drop everything and rush to their rescue from the very event they'd chosen over supporting me. It was like the universe was testing whether I could be angry and terrified and proud and disappointed all at the same time. And the answer was apparently yes, because human emotions are apparently designed to handle contradictory feelings with the efficiency of a Swiss watch powered by pure chaos. I walked into that hospital emergency room, still wearing my dress shirt and tie from graduation, looking like I'd come straight from a job interview instead of the ceremony my family had skipped. And despite everything, despite the abandonment, despite the broken promises, despite the fact that my biggest achievement had been overshadowed by a pool party gone wrong, all I cared about was making sure my son was okay. Because that's what being a parent means. Your kid's safety matters more than your wounded pride. Even when your wounded pride has very legitimate reasons for feeling wounded. I drove through the city like I was starring in my own medical drama. Except instead of looking cool and competent, I probably looked like a maniac in a dress shirt who'd lost a fight with a graduation gown. My tie was crooked. My hair was a mess from repeatedly running my hands through it. And I kept checking my phone at red lights, hoping for updates about Liam's condition. The emergency room parking lot was exactly what you'd expect from a Saturday afternoon medical crisis. Packed with cars belonging to people whose perfect days had taken sudden left turns into disaster territory. Walking through those automatic doors felt like entering an alternate universe where my graduation ceremony had never happened and my only identity was worried father of injured teenager. The emergency room waiting area was a special kind of purgatory filled with people in various states of medical distress and family members trying to look calm while internally freaking out. The fluorescent lighting made everyone look like extras in a zombie movie. And the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear was exactly as comforting as you'd imagine. I spotted Claire before she saw me, and the sight of her sitting in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs with her face buried in her hands hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened this morning, the argument, the abandonment, the casual dismissal of my biggest achievement, seeing her scared and vulnerable made my anger take a temporary backseat to basic human decency. She looked up when I called her name, and the relief that flooded her face was like watching someone remember how to breathe. "Marcus, thank God you're here," she said, jumping up and immediately reaching for me like I was a life preserver in rough seas. For a moment, I forgot that we were barely speaking to each other and just held my wife while she shook against my chest. "He's okay," she whispered into my shoulder. "He's going to be okay, but his leg is definitely broken and they think maybe his ankle, too." The way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me, made my heart crack a little. That's when I noticed the rest of the ensemble cast from Victor's pool party disaster. Grace was sitting in the corner looking smaller than usual in one of those oversized hospital chairs, clutching a bag of vending machine chips like they were a security blanket. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but not currently producing tears, which meant she was in that post-crying phase where kids try to act braver than they feel. When she saw me, her face lit up with the kind of relief that made me remember why being a dad was worth all the homework battles and curfew negotiations. "Daddy," she said, launching herself at me with enough force to nearly knock me over. I caught her in a hug that felt like coming home after a really long, really terrible trip. Liam's leg got hurt when the deck broke, but the doctor said he's going to be fine. And Victor bought me these chips from the machine because I was scared. Even in the middle of a medical crisis, she was giving me a full report with the thoroughness of a junior journalist, which was so perfectly graced that I almost smiled despite everything. But then I looked past my daughter and saw them, Victor and his parents, standing near the nurse's station like they belonged there, like they were part of our family crisis instead of the reason for it. Victor looked exactly like what you'd expect from a real estate mogul whose pool party had turned into a lawsuit waiting to happen. Expensive casual clothes that somehow still looked put together. That perfect hair that doesn't move even in emergency situations. And the kind of tan that comes from owning your own infinity pool instead of visiting community recreation centers. His parents, Richard and Susan, who I'd met exactly twice, and who'd made it clear both times that I wasn't quite what they'd envisioned for their precious Claire, were hovering nearby with the kind of concerned expressions usually reserved for family members, which was rich considering that I was the actual family member, and they were just the relatives of the guy whose construction shortcuts had put my son in the hospital. But there they were, acting like concerned grandparents while the actual father showed up looking like he'd been dressed by a tornado. "Marcus," Victor said, approaching me with the careful steps of someone who knows they're about to have an uncomfortable conversation. "I'm so sorry about Liam. I feel terrible about what happened. The contractors swore the deck was built to code, but obviously something went wrong." He had the decency to look genuinely upset, which made it harder to channel my rage in his direction. Even though channeling rage in his direction would have felt really good right about now. "Where is he?" I asked. Because small talk with the man whose party had injured my son wasn't high on my priority list. "Can I see him?" Victor nodded toward a set of double doors marked treatment area and explained that they were still doing x-rays, but that a doctor would come talk to us soon. Us? Like we were a team now, united by our shared concern for my son's welfare. That's when the full absurdity of the situation hit me like a freight train carrying irony and bad timing. Here I was, still wearing my graduation outfit, standing in a hospital emergency room, surrounded by the people who'd chosen a pool party over my academic achievement, which had turned into a medical emergency that required my immediate presence. The very event my family had prioritized over my ceremony was now demanding my attention on what was supposed to be my celebration day. How did it happen? I asked Clara. Partly because I needed to understand the medical situation and partly because I needed something to focus on besides the growing urge to point out that if they'd been at my graduation ceremony instead of Victor's party, we'd all be eating dinner at Bella Order right now instead of breathing hospital air and worrying about broken bones. Claire launched into the story with the detailed precision of someone who'd been replaying the accident in her head for the past hour. Everyone was by the pool and Liam was on the deck near the diving board area. Victor's parents were taking pictures and Grace was in the shallow end. Then there was this horrible cracking sound like with splitting and part of the deck just collapsed. Liam fell into the pool, but there was debris and broken boards and he couldn't get his leg free. Victor jumped in with his own version, probably because he felt responsible and needed to explain that this wasn't his fault exactly. The construction crew said they'd reinforced everything properly, but apparently there was some kind of structural issue with the support beams. The whole section just gave way under the weight. I've already called my insurance company and my lawyer because this should never have happened. Insurance and lawyers, exactly what every parent wants to hear about when their kid is injured. Were there other people hurt? I asked because if this was a mass casualty situation, it would explain why Claire had been so panicked when she called. Victor shook his head and explained that most of the party guests had been in the pool or on the grass when it happened, and Liam had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lucky us. Our family had won the lottery for being the primary victims of shoddy construction. That's when Dr. Patricia Williams appeared looking like she'd been dealing with weekend emergencies long enough to perfect the art of delivering medical information without causing additional panic. Mr. and Mrs. Hall, she asked, and I noticed that she automatically assumed Claire and I were the parents, while Victor and his family were just concerned bystanders. Finally, someone who understood basic family hierarchy. Liam's going to be fine, she said, which were the four most beautiful words I'd heard all day. He has a compound fracture in his left leg and a sprained ankle, which sounds worse than it is. We've set the bone and put him in a cast, and he'll need crutches for about 6 weeks. He was lucky. It could have been much worse given the circumstances. Relief flooded through me like someone had turned on a faucet of liquid calm. 6 weeks of crutches was manageable. 6 weeks was inconvenient, but not life-changing. 6 weeks meant he'd be mobile again before school started. And in the grand scheme of teenage disasters, this was relatively minor. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time since seeing those 95 missed calls. Can we see him? Claire asked, and Dr. Williams nodded toward the treatment area. He's asking for both of you, and he's been pretty worried about missing your graduation ceremony, she said to me with a knowing look. He mentioned it several times during treatment. Even drugged up and in pain, my son had been thinking about my graduation. The kid who'd been so excited about Victor's pool that he'd been willing to skip my ceremony was now worried that his accident had ruined my day. As we walked toward Liam's room, I caught sight of myself in one of those horrible hospital mirrors and realized I still looked like I'd come straight from academic achievement. My dress shirt was wrinkled, my tie was askew, and I had that particular disheveled appearance that comes from rushing through emergency situations while wearing formal wear. But for the first time all day, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Wearing exactly what I needed to wear, doing exactly what I needed to do. Finally, I was the most important person in the room. Not because of any degree or achievement, but because I was Liam's dad and he needed me. Once Liam was settled in his hospital room, propped up on pillows with his leg elevated and enough pain medication to make him pleasantly loopy, the adrenaline that had carried me through the past few hours finally started to wear off. Watching him sleep, his face relaxed for the first time since I'd arrived. The monitors beeping steadily to confirm he was going to be fine. I felt the emotional exhaustion hit me like a brick wall made of everything I'd been suppressing since this morning. The relief that my son was okay mixed with the delayed processing of everything else that had happened today, creating a cocktail of feelings that probably wasn't safe for human consumption. The drive home was the quietest our family had been in years. And not the comfortable kind of quiet that comes from contentment, but the heavy silence that settles over people who've just survived a crisis and are now forced to deal with all the underlying issues that the crisis temporarily pushed aside. Grace fell asleep in the back seat within 10 minutes. exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of watching her brother get hurt and spending 4 hours in a hospital waiting room. Claire stared out the passenger window like she was studying the passing scenery for a final exam. And I focused on driving because it was the only thing I could control in a day that had spiraled completely out of my influence. When we pulled into our driveway, our house looked exactly the same as it had this morning when I'd left for my graduation ceremony. But everything felt different. The beach towels Claire had been packing for Victor's party were still scattered across the living room coffee table, like evidence of a crime scene. The sunscreen and pool noodles now looking less like party supplies and more like reminders of how spectacularly our family's priorities had backfired. I stood in our entryway, still wearing my wrinkled dress shirt and crooked tie, and realized I felt like a stranger in my own home. "Marcus," Claire started, turning toward me with that expression people get when they're about to apologize for something they know can't be fixed with just words about this morning, about the graduation. But I held up my hand because I wasn't ready for apologies or explanations or the kind of relationship conversation that usually follows family emergencies. My emotional processing system was at capacity, and trying to deal with marriage counseling on top of everything else felt like asking a computer to run 15 programs at once. "I need some time to think," I said, which was probably the most diplomatic way to say that I needed space before I said something I'd regret for the rest of my marriage. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a few days, just until I figure out how to process all of this." The words came out calmer than I felt, which was probably a miracle considering that my internal emotional state resembled a tornado having an argument with a hurricane. Claire's face crumpled like I'd slapped her, but I could see in her eyes that she understood why I needed distance. "How long?" she asked, and the vulnerability in her voice almost made me change my mind. But I knew that staying would just lead to a fight neither of us was equipped to have while Grace was sleeping upstairs and Liam was recovering from surgery. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Long enough to figure out what today means for us. Long enough to understand how we got to a place where my family skipped my graduation for a pool party that put our son in the hospital." It sounded harsh when I said it out loud, but it was also accurate. And sometimes the truth sounds harsh because it is harsh, not because you're being unfair by speaking it. I packed a bag with the efficiency of someone who'd mentally rehearsed this scenario without realizing it. Throwing clothes and toiletries into my old college duffel bag while Claire sat on our bed watching me like I was dismantling our entire life instead of just taking a temporary break from it. The hotel I chose was a Hampton Inn downtown. The kind of place that caters to business travelers and people whose lives have temporarily fallen apart. Clean, anonymous, and equipped with cable TV and overpriced snacks to distract you from your problems. The first night alone was weird in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd gotten so used to the sounds of family life. Claire's breathing next to me, the kids moving around upstairs, the dishwasher running, the general ambient noise of a house where people live together. That the silence of a hotel room felt like being inside a sensory deprivation chamber. I ordered room service and ate dinner while watching ESPN, which should have felt like freedom, but instead felt like the world's most expensive time out. I turned my phone off except for calls from Liam and Grace because I needed space from Claire's text messages and voicemails that probably ranged from apologetic to defensive to worried. And I wasn't ready to navigate that emotional minefield while sitting alone in a hotel room eating overpriced club sandwiches. The only messages I wanted to see were from my kids. And thankfully, they both checked in that first night. Liam to complain about hospital food and Grace to tell me she missed me and when was I coming home. The next morning, I visited Liam at the hospital before Claire arrived, bringing him magazines and snacks and the kind of father-son conversation we hadn't had in months. He was more alert without the pain medication, which meant he was also more aware of the awkwardness of his parents' marriage crisis playing out around his hospital bed. "Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced?" he asked with the blunt directness that teenagers use when they're scared but trying to act mature about adult problems. "No," I said, which was true as far as I knew. Though I honestly wasn't sure what we were doing beyond taking a break from pretending everything was fine. "We just need some space to figure things out. Your mom and I had a disagreement about priorities, and we need to work through that without making you and Grace uncomfortable." It was the kind of diplomatic parent speak that probably fooled no one, but felt better than admitting I didn't know if my marriage was salvageable. Liam nodded like he understood, though I suspected he understood more than I was comfortable with. "The graduation thing was messed up," he said quietly. "I mean, I wanted to go to Victor's party because it sounded fun, but I knew your ceremony was important. I should have said something." The fact that my 14-year-old son had more emotional intelligence about the situation than his mother had shown was both heartening and depressing. "You're a kid," I told him. "It's not your job to manage adult priorities. That's on me and your mom." But internally, I was proud of him for recognizing that the situation had been unfair, even if he'd been too young to do anything about it at the time. It gave me hope that my kids were learning something about respect and priorities, even if their parents were still figuring it out. Over the next few days, I established a routine that felt like being a part-time parent and full-time hotel guest. I'd visit Liam every morning, help him with his physical therapy exercises, and bring him homework from school so he wouldn't fall behind. I'd pick up Grace after school twice a week, take her for ice cream or to the park, and listen to her process the family drama with the kind of earnest confusion that 11-year-olds bring to adult problems they can't quite understand. "When are you coming home, Daddy?" became her standard greeting. And each time she asked, I felt a little more pressure to figure out what home was supposed to look like if I decided to come back. Because that was the real question I was wrestling with in that hotel room. Not whether I could forgive Claire for choosing Victor's party over my graduation, but whether I could trust her to prioritize our marriage over her social ambitions in the future. The hotel manager, a woman named Janet, who'd apparently seen her share of temporary family refugees, started recognizing me in the lobby and would ask about Liam's recovery with the kind of genuine concern that made me realize I'd been living in this weird liminal space long enough to become a regular. "Your boy doing better?" she'd ask when I came back from the hospital, and I'd give her updates like we were old friends instead of strangers connected only by my family crisis and her professional hospitality. By the end of the week, I'd reached some conclusions about what I needed if this marriage was going to work. Not demands exactly, but boundaries that felt non-negotiable if we were going to rebuild trust. Claire needed to understand that my achievements mattered as much as her networking opportunities, that family obligations couldn't be discarded whenever something more exciting came along, and that respect was a two-way street that required actual effort to maintain. I also realized that I'd been so focused on becoming someone worthy of my family's pride that I'd forgotten to demand the kind of basic respect that shouldn't require earning. My master's degree was just a symbol. What really mattered was whether my wife saw me as a partner worth supporting or just a reliable guy who paid the bills while she pursued more interesting relationships with more successful men. The hotel room had become a cocoon where I could think without the noise of family dynamics and social expectations. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Eventually, I'd have to go home and have the conversation that would determine whether we could rebuild something worth rebuilding or whether my graduation day had marked the end of more than just my academic career. But for now, I was content to visit my son, hug my daughter, and figure out what kind of man I wanted to be when this temporary exile ended. After a week of living like a corporate refugee in a Hampton Inn that smelled permanently of industrial-strength coffee and broken dreams, I finally felt ready to go home and have the conversation that would either save my marriage or officially end it. The hotel room had served its purpose as a thinking tank where I could process 5 years of accumulated resentment without anyone asking me to fix dinner or help with homework. But I was starting to feel like I was hiding from my own life instead of figuring out how to improve it. Besides, the daily rate was eating into my savings faster than a teenager with a credit card at the mall. I called Claire from the hotel lobby, partly because I needed to make sure she'd be home, and partly because announcing my return on neutral territory felt safer than just showing up at the front door like some kind of marriage surprise party. "I'm ready to talk," I said when she answered, probably sounding more formal than romantic. But this wasn't a romantic conversation. This was a negotiation for the future of our relationship, and negotiations require clarity, not poetry. "Thank God," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice mixing with what sounded like genuine regret. "I've been hoping you'd call. I know we need to figure this out, and I know I messed up. I just want you to come home." The vulnerability in her voice almost made me soften my approach, but I'd spent a week preparing for this conversation, and I wasn't going to let emotion derail the boundary setting that needed to happen. When I walked through a front door that evening, the house felt both familiar and foreign, like visiting a place you used to live but haven't seen in years. Grace launched herself at me with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for returning war heroes. Chattering about everything I'd missed during my week-long absence as if I'd been deployed overseas instead of sulking in a hotel 5 miles away. Liam hobbled over on his crutches, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned that broken legs don't appreciate sudden movements, and gave me the kind of hug that teenage boys usually reserve for major life events. "Dad, are you back for good?" Grace asked with the direct approach to complex adult situations that 11-year-olds excel at. And I looked at Claire over our daughter's head, making it clear that the answer to that question depended on the conversation we were about to have. "We're going to talk about it," I said, which was honest without being scary. Though Grace's face suggested she understood that talking about it was adult code for this could go either way. After getting the kids settled with homework and snacks, a normal evening routine that felt surreal after everything that had happened, Claire and I sat down at our kitchen table like we were conducting a business meeting instead of trying to salvage 8 years of marriage. I'd actually made notes during my hotel exile, writing down the things that needed to change if we were going to make this work, Because approaching major life conversations with the organizational skills I'd learned in graduate school felt more productive than just yelling about hurt feelings. Before we start, I said, pulling out my phone where I'd save my talking points. I need you to understand that this isn't about punishment or making you feel guilty. This is about respect and priorities and making sure we're actually partners instead of just two people who share a mortgage and child-rearing responsibilities. Claire nodded, her face serious in a way I hadn't seen since we discussed buying our first house, and I took that as permission to continue. My achievements have to matter as much as yours, I said, starting with what felt like the most important point. I spent 5 years working toward that degree, and you treated my graduation ceremony like an optional social event that you could skip for better entertainment. That can't happen again. It sounded harsher than I'd intended, but it was also accurate, and I decided during my week of hotel reflection that accuracy was more important than diplomacy in this conversation. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt, which I appreciated because crying during boundary-setting conversations usually derails them into comfort-giving and apology-accepting before the actual issues get resolved. You're right, she said quietly. I was selfish. I got caught up in the excitement of Victor's party and I forgot that your graduation was the culmination of years of hard work. I prioritized networking over supporting my husband. And that was wrong. It wasn't just wrong. I continued because this needed to be completely clear. It was disrespectful and the kids noticed. Liam told me in the hospital that he knew the graduation was important but wanted to go to the party because it sounded more fun. Our children are learning that Dad's achievements are boring obligations while Victor's achievements are exciting celebrations. That's not the message I want them getting about marriage or family priorities. That's when Claire really started crying. Not the manipulative kind of tears that some people use to avoid difficult conversations, but the genuine kind that comes when someone realizes they've hurt people they love through their own selfishness. I never thought about it that way, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I just wanted the kids to have fun experiences and I wanted to help my business by meeting people. I didn't realize I was teaching them that your accomplishments don't matter. Victor can't be the standard for excitement in our family. I said, moving to what felt like the second most important point. I get that he's successful and fun and can afford experiences I can't provide, but if you're constantly comparing our life to his, then you're never going to be satisfied with what we're building together. I can't compete with unlimited entertainment budgets, and I shouldn't have to. Claire nodded emphatically like she'd been thinking about this too during our week apart. Victor texted me yesterday, she said, which immediately made my jaw clench because the last thing this conversation needed was more Victor content. He wanted to apologize again about Liam's accident and to say that he understood if we needed space from his events for a while. He actually said he'd been worried that his parties were causing problems for our family. Smart guy, I said. Because apparently Victor had better emotional intelligence about our marriage dynamics than my actual wife had been showing lately. What did you tell him? Because how Claire had responded to Victor's concern would tell me a lot about whether she understood the real issues we were dealing with. I told him that our family needed to focus on our own priorities for a while, she said. And I felt something in my chest relaxed for the first time in weeks. I said that I'd been using his events as an escape from dealing with problems in our marriage, and that wasn't fair to anyone, especially you and the kids. We talked for 2 more hours, covering everything from her interior design business aspirations to my career goals to how we wanted to handle family time and social obligations going forward. Claire admitted that she'd been feeling restless in our marriage. Not because she didn't love me, but because she'd been comparing our middle-class life to the wealthy lifestyle she'd experienced with Victor. And that comparison had made her take for granted the stability and partnership I provided. I don't want to go back to Victor, she said at one point, like I'd been worried about her leaving me for her ex-husband instead of just leaving me for someone more exciting. I want to appreciate what we have instead of always wanting what we don't have. I want to be proud of my husband's achievements instead of treating them like they're less important than social opportunities. The conversation ended with agreements, not just apologies. Claire would prioritize family obligations over networking events, especially when those obligations involved celebrating achievements that had required long-term sacrifice. We would both work on making our own life more interesting instead of relying on other people's parties for excitement. And most importantly, we would teach our children that respect and support are non-negotiable parts of being a family, even when other options seem more fun. A month later, Claire arranged a small dinner party, just us and the kids, to celebrate my graduation. She'd ordered a cake with congratulations, Marcus, written in frosting, bought flowers for the table, and even asked me to wear the suit I'd worn to the ceremony. It wasn't the celebration I'd originally planned and it came 5 weeks late, but it was better because it was deliberate. Claire had thought about what would make me feel valued and then made the effort to create that experience. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Liam, still on crutches, but healing well, gave a toast that made me embarrass myself by getting emotional. To Dad, who proved that you can work really hard for something and achieve it, even when other people don't always notice right away. And who came to the hospital even though we'd been jerks about his graduation. Grace added her own toast to Daddy, who's the smartest person I know and who loves us even when we make bad choices about pool parties. The dinner conversation was different from our usual family dynamics. More intentional, more focused on actually listening to each other instead of just waiting for our turns to talk. Claire asked questions about my graduate program, my thesis, my plans for using the degree in my career. The kids talked about school projects and weekend plans without mentioning Victor's latest acquisitions or comparing our family activities to more exciting alternatives. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed and we'd cleaned up the dishes together, Claire and I sat on our back porch with coffee and talked about our plans for the future. Not the distant future with major life changes, but the immediate future with small improvements that would build into better habits, date nights that didn't involve other people's events, family traditions that belonged to us instead of borrowed excitement from more successful friends. A marriage based on mutual respect instead of one person constantly trying to earn the other's attention. "I'm proud of you," Clarera said as we sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of our neighborhood settling down for the night. "Not just for the degree, but for standing up for what you needed from this marriage." I needed someone to tell me I was being selfish, even if I didn't want to hear it at the time. I reached over and took her hand, feeling like we were finally having the kind of conversation that married couples should have regularly instead of saving for crisis situations. "I'm proud of us," I said, "for figuring out how to fix this instead of just letting it stay broken." And for the first time since graduation day, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because I'd achieved something impressive, but because I'd learned how to insist on being valued by the people whose opinions mattered most.